So the idea here is the HCIL does a lot of diverse research. Today we've highlighted some of the big categories that have been active in the past year in the areas of AI, NLP, data viz, accessibility, but there's a lot of other work being done. And in order to make this work, we decided to take everything that wasn't one of those and put it in its own session. So in this last session, we have 12 papers. They're covering a range of topics. Some of the first couple are going to be building on the accessibility talks from the previous lightning talk section. We have some education work, we have some privacy and security work, and a few other things that are highlighting some of the cool work that's happening in the lab.
To start off with this potpourri, I have Pooja Upadhyay, who's going to be talking to us about how older adults make sense of technology might not be what designers consider, I guess, as technology.
Hi everyone, my name is Pooja and I'm a PhD student at the iSchool, and this work is done with Dr. Amanda Lazar and Dr. Dan Green. And we're looking at, in this work, we're looking at conceptualizations of technology proficiency through a case study of older adults. So over the last 20 years, commercial technologies have changed drastically, right? From early PCs with dial-up internet to many, many network devices and flip phones to smartphones and so on. But over the same time, different generations of older adults have been reported as facing negative experiences with technology, all these changing technologies. And such negative experiences have often been attributed to older adults' own low technology proficiency. So in this presentation, we argue for a major shift in how we conceptualize technology proficiency. First, we discuss how proficiency fits within the history of technology development, and then we look at how proficiency is currently measured. So to begin with, let's briefly look at the history of technology development. In system development, there are certain imaginations of users and contexts of use that inform the design of technology. For instance, in the 1980s, starting with commercial workplace technologies, for instance, a call center system would typically consider what stakeholders in the workplace, like a call center technician, would need in order to, let's say, log and keep track of a customer call. Once such systems were designed, they were deployed into the workplace and users were given training before successful use happened. But in the case of personal technologies, roughly, let's say, 1990s onwards, many workplace systems were actually began to be commercialized and adapted into all these diverse geographic and socio-technical contexts. Here's where things change, because a concept of user and context is not similarly applied to the design of systems. Rather, there are past versions of systems that are informing all these new systems that are being deployed into more personal spaces. For instance, search was a military research tool before it became patented and commercialized. So there are some differences between these two paradigms. In the first one, there's a context design match and a training element that makes successful use happen. It helps the user in recognizing the system's function and its design. But in terms of the home and personal technologies, commercial systems are supposed to be used out of the box without instruction, and successful use entirely depends on the user's own technology proficiency. So then how is proficiency measured? There are typically popular standardized survey scales that are applied at the population level. One example is computer proficiency questionnaire, and these often inform characterizations of what users look like or what user-centered designs of systems should look like. So this is an example of one of the items on the computer proficiency questionnaire, which asks about whether or not user is familiar with the calendar. But then our data shows that our data with older adults shows that proficiency is active, resourceful behavior, and past familiarity of systems is just one of the resources. For instance, this one participant, P1, is very familiar with the computer and computer calendar and the calendar on the phone. But then she decides to use this combination of the phone calendar and the paper calendar. When she's out on a walk, she would use the phone calendar to add information about events that she learns from her friends or something she remembers. She would log on her phone. But then as soon as she got back home, she would transfer this to her paper calendar because it gave her more information and all of the information in one place. So then it's likely that P1 is going to say no to all of these questions on the computer proficiency questionnaire. And it's likely that P1 is going to appear as not proficient when it's really not the case. She's proficient with the computer and the online calendar. She just chooses to not use this. So then how can we better capture the complexities behind how a user applies proficiency? Thank you for listening, and please feel free to reach out on this email if you have any questions or discussions. Thank you.
Next, we have the first of two remote talks. So we're continuing with older adults, looking at their work in a makerspace community.
Hi, my name is Ripu Hu. I'm a second-year PhD student in the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. Sorry for not being able to present our work in person this year. I'll be presenting through this pre-recorded video that I hope you guys enjoy watching. In this project, we study older adults' use of community-based technology. This work has been done by me, Alicia Pradhan, Beth Bonsonier, and Amanda Lazar. In the next few slides, I'll be talking about the motivation of the work, methods, and some key findings. Older adults, like others, often use technology as an important part of being in a community. Past work often focuses on supporting older adult individuals in adopting technologies, while this project focuses on a community perspective by studying the ways that older adults sustain the use of a technology environment. The research reported in this project was conducted as part of a collaboration that began in July 2019 with an independent living community located in the US. The context of our collaboration was a resident-led initiative to revamp the community business center into a makerspace. During the study, we worked with 5 machines in the makerspace, including 3D printer, cry cut machine, jewelry maker, button maker, and sewing machine. We worked alongside the committee for 32 months across our ethnographically informed involvement in the makerspace. 31 participants consented to being a part of the study. We collected data about the makerspace through a variety of methods, including attending monthly committee meetings, where residents and staff involved in running the makerspace met to have discussions on resources allocation, committee meetings, and bigger picture plans for the space. And second, participant observations, where we engaged in the makerspace activities alongside other class attendees. And third, semi-structured interviews and email correspondence with individuals involved in the makerspace. And fourth, co-creation and evaluation sessions of the reference materials. This picture here shows the reference material we co-created with the participants for the cry cut machine. In the next few slides, I'll present 2 findings about providing the static resources, that is, reference materials. First, a key elements to include in the reference materials to make information more accessible for participants. They are pictures, terminology, and labeling. Residents specifically mentioned the use of pictures to get familiar with each step of the making process. In addition, participants varied in their preferences for pictures. 2 types of pictures were applied: step-by-step demonstration pictures, like the first picture on the top right of the slide that explicitly demonstrate all the steps of the making jewelry, and an overview picture like the bottom right on this slide that gives people an overview of the final creation. Participants also carefully considered the terminology used for referring to the parts of the machines. There was a tension aroused between using personalized names versus standardized names when creating the reference materials. Lastly, participants envisioned a way of labeling to extend the idea to further support residents in using the makerspace tools, such as labeling the supplies, the tools, and physical space. The second finding about reference materials we want to share is regarding the different roles of it. Different roles varied with the type of the machine and how it related to resources in the space. There are four that are reminders, specific task-oriented, troubleshooting, and a multi-purpose overview. The reference materials for the button maker and jewelry making tools function primarily as reminders, used mainly to help novices remember each step as they progressed through a making activity and promoted the residents' efforts to engage in making independently. References for crack cut machine was an example of specific task-oriented references. The crack cut reference has different volumes like the pictures on the right showed. Each volume include one task and it would build on the prior so that residents could gain some experience from the first task and then and then step into the next one. Troubleshooting menu is designed for machines like sewing machine, which many individuals could independently operate the machine, but with some stumbling blocks which prevented residents from finishing a project. Therefore, we choose the most common troubleshooting operations that residents described from the manufacturer menu. Multi-purpose overview reference is mainly served as informational and motivational to give people just the right amount of information to have a sense about the machine and motivations to get started on using them. This is the end of the lightning talk. Please email me if you have any questions or would like to discuss anything with me. Thank you for watching.
See, I'm going to invite Roger Fan or Richard. Is he up here?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel. Go by Richard. Today, I'll present domain-based embeddings for characterizing online sharing behaviors. And just to quickly clarify, domain here refers to the domain name of a URL or a link. So first of all, why do we need to understand user behaviors? I've listed out three examples. We need to understand the behaviors to provide personalized experience for users. We can help businesses to develop newer, better, more useful products. And we can address online polarizations and hopefully to facilitate content moderation. And we want to do that quantitatively so that we can produce reusable, sustainable pipelines that can be used for future tasks. On the right is a table from a literature review that surveyed the methods that prior literature has used. Particularly, there's a second column called data type on what kind of aspects or contents or behaviors that prior literature has looked at while characterizing social media users. And in that column, a lot of them are user profiles, likes, retweets, and quite a few things on this example. Hi, Joel. We have images, we have mentions, we have hashtags, all in this one example, and we also have tags. All of these aspects have been focused on by prior literature. However, in this example, in addition to text, the HCIL account also shared the link from hcil.umd.edu, and this link sharing behavior has not been focused as much, and it is our focus for this project. So how are we going to include it? What are we going to compare it with? So first of all, we take the retweet network. So if one user retweets another user, we can connect these two users on the retweet network. We can also build a link sharing network. So if users share a link from, in this case, news domains, these users can be connected with the domain names, in this case, in this kind of network. And this is a bipartite network. That means users are only connected with non-users, in this case, news domains. And if we merge the two, we get a heterogeneous information network. The benefit of using one of these networks is you have one single network, but retains information from both of the previous networks. So how are we gonna quantitatively transform the users in a network into some quantitative representation so that we can apply these into for example, machine learning tasks, we use Prone. Prone is fast and scalable network embedding methods that transform these nodes or users in networks into multi-dimensional embeddings or vectors so that we can directly apply them into quantitative methods. And how do we evaluate our method here? In political discussion, we know that politicians from the same party are generally close to each other in the ideological spectrum, and they are often far away from politicians from the other party. So in our first task of inferring politicians' ideology, we want our method to reflect and demonstrate this phenomenon. And as a result, for all three structures, the results is fairly good. We have Pearson R well above 0.9 in inferring the ideology of politicians. And as you can see in the first two, in the retweet and the link sharing bipartite graphs, the performance about the same, but the heterogeneous information network really outperforms both of the two graphs with single modality. So that's our first task. Down the road, we're trying to use 3 more tasks to evaluate our method. First one is to infer news sites political leaning. We want to see if we were able to characterize disinformation agents, and we also want to try to evaluate news qualities with our methods. And that's it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please email me. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And now we're going to switch it up from a different user base and a different domain. We're going to be talking, if I can bring or ask Jimmy Lin to come. Here you are.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy Lin. I'm here to present switch mode, step up from the block-based programming. So I'll make a lot of connection from the early morning David's talk. So I hope you remember something from that talk. So I just want to make sure I put it out first. This is a collaboration project between the University of Maryland and the Vex Robotics. And the goal here is to support learners transition from block-based programming to text-based programming. So if you remember from the morning talk, this is called Scratch. This is one of the block-based programming environments. And students can drag and drop the blocks from the left side to the right and write a program. So many people might ask, why do we start with block-based programming? For students or learners that's in a younger age, it's very easy to start. It's just drag and drop, like in 10 seconds, you can let the cat to do something. And also it is syntax free because you're just basically doing like a Lego block, you snap to each other. Like if you can't snap, you did something wrong. If snap together, it can run. And next is, it's very colorful. Like students love to see the colors. And as a teacher, you would use a lot of color coding in your classroom. It's same here for the programming. And also it can create animations or storytelling or physical computing components based on whichever program you're choosing from. There's definitely more benefit adds to it. However, if you ask students or like if you go professionally, this is what you might look like a professional IDE. And going from students from scratch like this to this, what do you think students gonna think? It's crazy, it's too much, it's too complicated. So we want to build something to support the transition there. But like, again, why the transition? Because if students going to the AP Computer Science A courses, it's a text-based programming course, which is Java. And if students want to go to CS career, like go to big tech company, Google, Facebook, Apple, they need text-based programming language. They can't do Scratch or blocks in these big tech companies. And also based on the previous research, students feel authenticity with the text-based programming. They can actually type things and they feel that's what a real programmer does. And the research found that with a sudden transition, students feel like it's learning a brand new language. They don't make the connection until like a couple weeks later after text-based programming. So here's the design of switch mode. On the top, it's come from the Scratch based environment. It has head block, stack block, Boolean, reporter, and C shape, and a cap block at the end. We did not create one for that, but everything else we created a corresponding switch mode blocks. So allow students to type any code in it or anything in it. So the example here on the left side, you can see it probably better, is a block example versus a switch example. So you can see everything in the blocks. There's a corresponding Python underlying there, and students are able to type the Python comments there. So as here you can see, like, we can create an environment that has 3 lines with blocks and only 1 line in switch. Students are able to see, like, the blocks is the one that they're comfortable with, but also one line of the code that's exceeding what their ability is right now, or they are trying to reach out. Here you can see with the C shape, the for loop is in text-based. In switch mode, students can try it and keep going forward to the text-based programming environment. Hope the video works. Yes. So if here on the traditional block-based program, you write up this thing, you can do the right click convert block to switch blocks. You are able to see the underlying Python code behind it. So this way students can keep moving forward by converting and seeing what they did wrong, or they can actually drag and drop a block and type. But convert is the easiest and the quickest way for them to first step into the Python and see it there. If students go into more advanced programming, they can do more with switch mode. They can even have multi-lines or create the whole program in switch mode or basically in Python. And we're not creating a brand new artificial language for the middle gap. We're just using pure Python, the knowledge transfer. So some things in the progress right now is we're still working on the syntax highlight, as many professional IDE has. And also we are building more additional debugging feature. That's my goal for the summer, to get these 2 knockouts out of the door. And something more related to HCI is, what is the level of complexity as learners use each programming modality, like block, switch, and text? Do students write different programs based on the modalities? How do they write it? Do they use more typing or convert? That's something interesting to see in the fall study. And thank you. And PowerPoint definitely messed up this format.
So continuing with the coding strand of this potpourri, if I could ask Carolyn Berger to come on up.
All right. Okay. So I want you to imagine that you're a gladiator descending into a pit. You hear shrills from spectators around you, and each level of the arena stares down at you, anticipating a long-awaited battle. But this isn't ancient Rome. This is a giant tiered lecture hall, just like the one we're in today. You yourself might have taught in it or taken classes in it, in a university campus just like Maryland. And the spectators, they're students learning to program. The gladiator, it's an instructor armed only with their laptop and some notes, and the feat they're about to attempt is to write running source code in an auditorium full of students. While an effective means of engaging an audience and conveying practical programming skills, we found that the instructors liken this form of live coding to a performance, or as one of our participants puts it, a gladiatorial battle. In the words of one of our participants, who is a computer science instructor, and then I'm teaching in a classroom that feels like a gladiatorial ring. 200 seats in a wall up in front of me, and I have to lean back all the way to see the top. And really the only constraint in the classroom is that it's terrifying. It's the most terrifying experience I've ever had. Live coding is the process of writing code live on a computer in front of students during class. Live coding models the process of programming and gives students insights into practical programming skills and practices. However, writing code alone in front of students with little involvement from the class is a passive form of instruction. Active engagement is an important component of effective learning, but fostering engagement requires teacher preparation and time, and risks increasing workload and burnout. So a common technical setup for live coding is that the instructor might be here, and instead of seeing my slides, you'd see my coding environment. Students can follow along on their own laptops, and a teacher might talk aloud, providing rationale for actions taken, and encourage students to ask questions while they are live coding. So we followed a research through design approach by designing a prototype and conducting semi-structured interviews with 2 instructors, 7 teaching assistants, and 6 students. During each session, we solicited feedback on a live coding prototype tool designed to scaffold the process by enabling students to follow along on their own devices as well as give instructors a high-level overview of student programming activity. Our thematic analysis of these sessions enabled us to identify factors that serve as barriers against effective live coding, as well as those that benefit the practice. We found that constraints in the teaching environment, negative feelings, and communication breakdown make live coding difficult. An instructor reported, "The room has monster screens. There's 4 of them." Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's more here. But if you don't have eagle eyes, you can't see them. It's still too small. So I have Visual Studio Code blown up to the max so that they can see it. So what's the problem here? It's the amount of different windows that there is, and text isn't big enough. It's just trying to get the text big enough, but also to the point that I can use it on my screen. In particular, teachers and students reported intentional and unintentional mistakes, the ability to involve the class, and flexibilities of scaffolding as benefits of live coding. An instructor reported, "Well, what if we did blah?" "Yeah," and I go, "That's a good question. I have never thought about approaching it that way. Let's see what it does." Based on our findings, we recommend considering how personal computers might detract from live coding lectures and how to direct student attention to important parts of the instructor's code. To support student-teacher collaborative live coding, we recommend tools to support a unified digital space, accessed via multiple devices. When a large classroom of students are live coding, errors that students encounter in peeking into student editors may help the teacher monitor student progress. While the manuscript was rejected for this, we are incorporating feedback from the reviewers, which was really, really helpful to improve the paper. And if you're interested in this work, please check out our paper. Thanks.
And so now we're going to switch to science education. I invite newly minted Dr. Daniel to the stage.
Daniel just defended his dissertation last week.
Oh, God.
Yeah, last week.
Yeah, so.
Hey.
So this is going to be a very small nugget of my dissertation research because I can't possibly fit this all in this amount of time. So the overall goal of my dissertation research is looking at how to help youth be able to engage with and talk about and sort of stay in the driver's seat of talking about their interests, which can then be in sort of informal learning environment. So I'm looking at this through the stickers in an everyday context. So this means stickers, like something you take off a sheet of paper and you put on something else, or like the equivalent of that digitally. And so this was a common thing where when the youth were asked about, they perceived stickers as being something that you can stick on. They either described that in that way or gave some examples of it. So like for instance, an example we have here of a postcard of Yellowstone National Park with a dinosaur sticker stuck on it. So it's taken the postcard of Yellowstone and transformed it into being a prehistoric time using a dinosaur. So this is a relatively simple example of how you can use stickers as sort of a visual metaphor to sort of change the meaning. What's a more complex idea? So let's go to sci-fi. It's great for complex ideas. So we have here is an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where our heroes are tasked with trying to understand aliens that speak entirely in metaphor. And this being in the 90s, they use largely like words and written things like that. So what happens like this if this is more visual, if it's like takes place more in the terms of what we might see today? So I'm going to show you an example of this, and I'm just going to let it speak for itself. So there's going to be no sound, so it's just going to be visuals. So you can see here, you might know someone who talks to you like this, and you might first be like, what are they talking about? So this is an example of sort of like talking via like visual metaphors. And this example is using GIFs. Well, my research is looking more specifically at stickers because it provides a bit more of an opportunity for composition between the youth and their parents sort of to collaboratively work on the meaning. So I'm going to give you some examples here of how youth can communicate with their parents So specifically, I'm looking at sort of like the examples of real world interaction dynamics between parents in a community settings with the youth and how stickers are acting there. This specifically is happening as part of a kitchen chemistry session. So this is, if you don't know, it's where parents and their youth, their children, work together as a group to sort of like cook something or bake something based upon like learning a scientific concept. In this instance, we have some brownies where there are some missing ingredients in the brownie recipe, and they have to sort of like work collaboratively to create a successful brownie recipe by their definition. So what does this look like when they're using stickers? So part of this is that looking at how parents were often described as being like a resource gathering role. And so in this instance, we scaffolded where the parents would go off and shop for the ingredients that were missing. They would provide images. The youth would then comment back using stickers only. So in this instance, we show how there's a cat grabby sticker combined with the heart sticker to indicate they wanted the cream cheese that was right underneath it, as well as the butter one underneath Buelow by having a butter sticker pun, as well as a yes cat. And this worked well. And the parents thought it was great too, because it structured it well. They could understand how the stickers could be used, and they worked with that. There was also an opportunity for some more playful interactions using stickers in this session, sort of help them like break the ice and start to begin to use stickers and sort of formulate a vocabulary. However, since this was unstructured, there was some room for misinterpretation. So in this instance, this sort of like Marshmallow Brown's frowny face was interpreted as being quiet or leave me alone by the parent. And this is a collaboration effort where the parent took a photo and then the parent and youth were adding stickers. Whereas what the child was really meaning was, why did you take the picture? So this sort of like brings up the point where like perhaps there could have been a little bit more room to then have them come together face to face and talk about what they meant by the stickers to avoid this kind of miscommunication. So overall, sort of scaffolding or engaging with ways that the youth and parents have already are interacting, and then putting stickers into that can really help with the interaction dynamics there, where they're learning to use stickers together, and making sure to keep the session playful overall, so that there's a safe place to learn how to use stickers. And just as a reminder, so this is about stickers. That's not just about interests or tasks, but it's about the people that are sending and receiving the stickers too. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So I would like to thank the Science Ever Group, where this was took part of, as well as my advisor, Dr. Tammy Clegg.
So up next, we'll continue with education. Rotem will come and discuss data science curricula in high schools.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to present here my great team, Peter, Rachel, and Professor Weintraub. And for the last 8 months, we're studying data science, and today I'm going to talk about the landscape of introductory data science environments and curricula. So all of us consume and create data all day long. And we live in data-driven world. So students need to prepare to that, to deal with data, to understand data. And we are trying to build a new curricula for data science for high school students. And the first phase of our research was to understand what exists. So we try to understand what exists in K-12 education, and we looked into different curricula that already inside schools. And no one wants to actually learn about data from 50 years ago or even older, but it's part of the deal with the current curricula that exist. So we were wondering how we can situate data science instruction into the live experience of students, building on their interests, culture, different experience, different things that they really care about. And this is the main goal of the bigger project we are dealing with. So for this part, we investigated 296 data sets that exist in 4 widely used high school data science curricula: IDS, UCubed, Code.hs, and Bootstrap. And we took different analytical lenses in order to examine those. So we looked into the data set themselves and also the environment that students used within these curricula. And we examined the type of the tools, the technology used, the programming language, and the size of the data set, the recency of the data sets, and their proximity. And we find that the different curricula, these four, which are the major one that exists in the US, use a mix of data gathering, data analysis, and programming tool to teach and learn data science practices. But most of the data analysis tools and practices are using a programming tool, which was quite interesting. But the different tools are providing different experiences and opportunities for learning. We have example here on the left side of the screen. We have the example for programming task. So we can see that students are required to run and modify predefined code. Not a lot of interactivity exists on these tasks, just copy and paste most of the time. On the other hand, we have different visual tools which provide more open exploration, and most of them are using drag and drop. Here we can see CodeApp, which is really cool and nice environment, and students can be more involved and engage with the data they are studying. About the data set themselves, so we found that most of the data are really small or medium size, which means most of them are between 10 rows to 100, which affects the data science practices. We want the practices in the curricula to be more authentic and to mimic the work of the data scientists in real world. So this is one point that need to be fixed, to our opinion. We also see that most of the data sets are from the past decades. So not a lot of data are from 50 years ago, but it still exists and should be modified. And some of the data sets uses real data that the student themselves are producing, which is very good and should be considered to further design of different curricula. So if you want to hear more about our research on this experiment or the other things, come to our poster. Thank you very much.
Shifting now to a new context, Victoria Chang will come talk about social VR.
All right, hi everyone, my name is Victoria Chang. So today I'm going to be talking about social virtual reality space for professional events, and specifically for for networking, social networking while you're at those events. So in 1996, two researchers, Steve Harrison and Paul Dorish, published a paper starting with the title Replacing Space, and a sentence that ran through it a lot was places, not spaces, frame appropriate behavior, and we can think of a convention center. Some days they're dressed for high conferences, and then the next day they could host a Comic-Con. So very different codes of conduct and how you might dress different types of vendors and different type of networking there. And I had a mic yesterday, so I'm really sorry if I keep switching around. But okay, so for spatiality, the reason why I wanted to look into this is because in the last years, we've seen that people have started to put effort and research into looking at virtual spaces or virtual platforms and seeing how you might use those to support interactions. So in VR, you get this egocentric view or experience, so first-person view, and you're spatially oriented within that environment. So my research question is, how does the spatial design of VR, virtual reality, shape people's behavioral expectations for attending social professional events? So professional event here is an event that advances the individual's network in their intended career path. And then we're also looking at it from the host and the attendees perspective. So the host is the person who's responsible for bringing value to the event, so the value generator. And then the attendee is generally the person who's attending the event and finds value from the event. So we had 13 participants total, 5 hosts and 8 attendees. We observed them through over 19 different professional social events of their own choosing. And then we followed all of those with semi-structured interviews. And this project actually started with an interest in looking at specifically nonverbal behaviors and gestures as you might perceive or send them inside of these augmented spaces. But then we started realizing through our data collections and our interviews that there were a lot of different intentions from the host side of designing their spaces in these specific ways. So as you can see, there's speaker sessions that are modeled after this room right here on the top left. There's poster sessions. Some people had it in an iceberg. Some people had their professional events inside of like a Pokemon render space. And we also found that on the attendee side, there were different, even though the host might expect certain types of behaviors, the attendees would behave either similar or very differently from that. So our findings still have to do with nonverbal cues as they frame a lot of the inspiration behind this. Some participants described VR as a place where you can have conversations where you don't even need to talk. Sorry. And I'll show you. So this is an alt space VR. So what you're seeing here is this participant was throwing up a lot of emojis as a reaction to someone else. So these emojis, you can have a continuous stream of them as long as you keep clicking the button. And people are describing this as generating different facial expressions because you're oriented in that space. So this kind of has to do with breakout rooms where people would kind of signify that they're around on the periphery of a circle by using these emojis and kind of designing the space so that there are areas where you can break out into, like a fireplace or a tree, and they would compare this to Zoom, where you can't easily do this. So some things that people talked about were teleportation. So teleportation is something that's very unique to VR, where you can kind of trespass these visual physical boundaries inside of VR. So even though someone put an iceberg up, the yellow circle is one of our participants. He would keep going to the highest point of the iceberg that he could find. Teleportation, though, also breaks the idea of queues a lot of times, so lining up. So at a conference, you might talk to someone because you're lined up with them, waiting for coffee, but participants talked about how in VR, you don't really have that opportunity because you have that access to instantaneity. And then also there's fun. So a lot of people were saying that in VR, there's a lot of fun or there's not really enough. So there's no structure or they're not sure what the structure should be. So what you're seeing here is an example of a host who designed a bar specifically for people to go and grab drinks with contacts that they just made in his space. But then what you're seeing here is a spontaneous clapping session. So all the participants here just started clapping in unison for like 30 seconds because people just came in here and started smashing bottles around, and then someone threw the bottle really far. So I'll end with these two quotes. So the first, we saw two distinct types of host intention. So some people designed it, as I said, kind of like this. They even designed their avatars with a specific way of being, and then they had designed also staggered stadium seating, kind of like this. Other people said that what really matters is being able to discover, explore, and wonder as part of play, and that's actually how you get to know people and how you get to network with people. So thank you very much from myself and my advisor.
Awesome, thank you. So now we're switching back to a recording, staying on the professional strand, but switching to privacy and security issues in library contexts.
Hello, my name is Noel Warford, and today I'm going to be talking about a paper which is going to appear at USIC Security this year, how library IT staff navigate privacy and security challenges and responsibilities. And of course, I would like to thank all of my co-authors listed on the slide, as well as SP2 and the HCIL for giving me this chance to talk about this work. So why are we studying library IT staff in particular? Well, libraries offer all kinds of critical digital services, especially for people with few resources. So the inability to purchase a home computer of their own, and these people, it's documented in prior work, use these resources to do things like file their taxes or look for jobs or apply for housing benefits. Library IT staff, as is perhaps not surprising, have small teams and low budgets. Several of our participants were the only person who worked on this for a library system. And because they manage these computing resources, their decisions directly influence the digital safety of participants, which we define as security, privacy, as well as abuse and harassment prevention. So in this work, we asked what kinds of privacy tools and strategies, if any, do library staff provide for their patrons and why? So just to make the threat model a little bit more clear, it's worth knowing that libraries face some privacy related threats from the Department of Homeland Security, for example, who in 2015 sought to bar the use of Tor in libraries. The FBI also in 2015 subpoenaed patron records using a particular provision of the Patriot Act. And in general, modern surveillance capitalism would like to have patron behavior records in order for better advertising or other sort of capitalistic types of gains. So in this work, we conducted interviews with library IT staff and learned about some of their responsibilities and particular challenges, which I'll go over briefly. And of course, I would encourage you to take a look at the paper for more information. So first and foremost, they manage the resources at their disposal. So this includes public PC management, especially making sure that those PCs are sort of private, both from outside threats, but also other patrons using them, print, copy, and fax infrastructures, and sort of general digital resources. So that includes things like audiobooks or journal access or other services that libraries provide, usually for free. They also, sort of as informal parts of their roles, provide assistance via sometimes formal digital skills education, like classes that they might choose to host, or simply ad hoc troubleshooting. You know, one participant had their desk placed so that they could see patrons and be asked questions and things like that. So their goals are the utility of these particular resources, but also protecting patron privacy, both from internal and external threats, as well as library infrastructure itself, protecting the print system from ransomware and things like that. And while doing all of these things, these IT staff sought to maintain library values. So our participants told us that they saw libraries as safe spaces for intellectual freedom and browsing the internet free of surveillance and things like that, as part of this larger sort of values framework that libraries and other work on librarians has shown. Now, the threats that these IT staff face when managing these resources fall into sort of two categories. First, there's risk to their infrastructure, as I previously mentioned, the public PCs, print systems, et cetera. And these, the sort of most salient attack in this case were attacks from patrons themselves who were trying to, scan the local network for other machines or ransomware. And then perhaps even more salient was data collection, both from third-party vendors like the aforementioned, audiobook providers and things like that, or requests from law enforcement. Now, the interesting thing about this is that attacks from patrons were almost unheard of, and only one of the few participants who mentioned ransomware attacks had actually experienced them. The rest had heard about them. And in comparison, our participants viewed data collection from third-party vendors as common and basically impossible to do anything about. Once a patron goes onto a third-party vendor's website, for example, it's hard to control what information they might choose to give to that vendor. And requests from police were a common worry, worry that law enforcement might come in and ask them for something. So the usual strategy was to not collect data at all. So that's a little bit of a preview, and I encourage you to look for this paper to get more into the threats and the details and some of the trade-offs they face.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sanya. I'm just wrapping up my third year here at iSchool. Today, I'm going to present our paper on design insights from smart home power users on enhancing data transparency, visibility, and control. So first of all, why are we talking about smart home privacy? Smart homes have smart home devices that are connected to the internet that collect and share data outside of the home that could potentially have privacy and security risks inside the home. And smart home privacy and security research until now focused on everyday average users, but our team was interested in privacy-conscious power users who spend vast amount of time and money in setting up their smart homes and also are aware of these privacy and security risks at their home and want to mitigate their concerns. So we had questions for these population when they set up their smart home and wanted to make it private and secure. What kind of difficulties they faced, And based on that experience, what ideas did they have for future privacy enhancing tools for smart homes? We conducted 10 focus groups with 32 privacy conscious power users. And for the sake of this short talk, I'll focus on the second research question. So we found out that our participants wanted to see and control their smart home data. And first of all, they really wanted a centralized location. You know, our participants use, they quote, smattering of ecosystem using Amazon, Google, Apple, and so on. So they would really appreciate a centralized location to take care of this. And on that centralized location, they wanted to see device status and also how their smart home data flow is going inside out of their house. Thinking about control, so our participants wanted to customize their network traffic list, build, allow, and deny lists, and based on that customized list, they also wanted to be notified. So if a device is speaking to an endpoint that they did not designate, they wanted to know, hey, something's going on. Do you want to check about it? And this is the most interesting about our participants, that they have the bandwidth to think about other types of users, such as guests, visitors, children, and domestic workers. And they really want this tool to be usable for all of these users, which connects to our discussion. So how do we make these tools usable for everyone? First of all, very simple and basic, but filtering. So filtering accommodates a variety of users' preferences and objectives. So let's think about all this vast smart home data in one visualization. Some users might want to see it by device type, data type, frequency, or destination where the endpoints are pinging to. Second of all, although our participants wanted to create customized network traffic list, they also acknowledged that not everyone wants or able to do this. So we're thinking about what if manufacturers can build a default network traffic list so that users who are less technical can also build up on this default network traffic list. Last but not least, thinking about assigning different roles and responsibilities. Yes, in an ideal world, everyone would have the same control, everyone would have the same authority, but in practice, this would not work. Everyone will be overriding on each other's preferences. So thinking about assigning different roles and responsibilities, setting priorities on different types of users, or even setting priorities on different types of devices. So these three recommendations or discussions that we have will let a variety of users use these privacy enhancing technologies and tools within smart homes. So thank you for listening. And also, if you have questions, come up to me. If you're even more interested, please read our other related paper that is going to be presented in HCIL. Thank you so much.
We have two more talks, people. Two more talks before you can ask questions. Min Chung, are you here?
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Min Chung Kim, and I'm a first-year PhD student at the iSchool. And today I'll be talking about research I've been conducting with Zothe Mui, Anna Lenhart, Katie Shilton, and Jessica Vitek to define who and what influences privacy discourse. And by privacy discourse, we mean anything related to privacy advocacy, which can be looking at who is defining what privacy is, and actions such as publishing papers, attending conferences, or establishing connections with policymakers. What actions are highlighting what privacy issues to focus on for privacy legislation? So why research influence in privacy discourse? Because it impacts the design and interactions with technology. So technology policy influences the design of HCI tools because the design has to comply with regulatory standards. So one of the core design considerations is privacy. So if these tools are shaped by policy, then in return, who and what influences these regulations? And what roles do HCI researchers play in the design of these regulations? So the overarching question for our research was, how do privacy ideas become influential in shaping regulations? To answer this question, we conducted 23 semi-structured interviews with US-based privacy experts from academia, NGOs, advocacy groups, and the media. The interview questions focused on defining what influence is, such as what activities are influential, and then a discussion of the current and future privacy issues that were on their radar. So one of the two big themes are the challenges to influencing privacy discourse. First, there is the invisibility of privacy. So one of the primary challenges voiced by participants was the idea that privacy and data protection issues struggle to gather vocal public support behind them. Privacy is difficult to understand in general, and even when understood, privacy issues are secondary to other urgent events. And second, when it comes to defining expertise in privacy, there are existing inequities, such as the heavy weird population, and weird as in Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, that can be drowning out other voices. So experts noted that the same circle of people who show up every time will be the ones with credibility and influence. And finally, there are the competing values. So experts and legislators struggle with trade-offs between a protective privacy infrastructure and a data-centric innovation and service model in tech. This adds to the political power imbalance between big tech and consumers because market incentives keep industry from making voluntary changes. Now for the successful components of influence and expertise. First is now making the invisible visible. As discussed before, a challenge to privacy is that it is not a kitchen table issue that is at the top of the list for most voters. So a tactic to bring light to these issues is storytelling, which was emphasized by many of the experts. Personal stories and anecdotes are convincing evidence. Second success in influence is to build a brand to be credible in the eyes of decision makers. Factors like being seen often in publications, having a social media presence, or even having close connections with the policymakers all contribute to influence in policymaking. Finally, community engagement and local action are crucial for influence. As a part of this is designing tools that such as websites, apps, or curriculum that raise awareness and educate and support the community on how to take control of their privacy. So as a takeaway for who and what influences privacy discourse, we can take these challenges and successes in influence and privacy to think about where we are as HCI researchers among the who, and reflect on how we are proceeding with our research to think about what about our work is influential. In closing, I would like to thank our project PIs and the US Census Bureau and Meta for funding this project. Thank you.
And last but not least, before the final Q&A and the poster session, Julio, can I, yeah, there you are.
12 million people. This figure represents the approximate population of the state of Ohio, and it also represents 578 times the capacity of Madison Square Garden in New York. Unfortunately, it also represents the number of people that have gone through domestic violence over the past year only in the US. Hi, again, I'm Julio, and currently my collaborators and I are seeking to better comprehend how survivors seek digital safety advice. This is traditional cybersecurity or conventional cybersecurity. On one side, we have a benign user, and on the other side, we have a malicious hacker that has a lot of technical knowledge. And in the middle, we have the internet. In this case, the malicious hacker wants to steal information from the user and they want to impersonate them. However, they do not have physical access to their devices. But what happens in unconventional scenarios? Let's take a look at the following example. Before that, so based on this scenario, we as users are recommended certain actions or cybersecurity tips and advice, including installing antivirus software, enabling two-factor authentication to protect our online accounts, and also using VPN software to be more anonymous online. Now, let's take a look at a non-conventional cybersecurity scenario. In this case, the user and the hacker are living under the same roof because they are partners. And also in this scenario, the hacker might not have a lot of technical expertise, but they have physical access to their devices, and they want to monitor the user's conversations and their whereabouts when they go out of home. My question for you now is conventional cybersecurity advice appropriate in this scenario? Prior work has studied how abusers in the context of domestic violence use technologies like smart home devices to harass their victims. And in addition, security practitioners have documented and evaluated general or conventional cybersecurity advice. In this project, we are building upon this prior work by interviewing English-speaking and Spanish-speaking survivors of domestic violence, as well as case workers, people who support them at family justice centers, and prompt them about how they use social media platforms when they're trying to learn how to protect their online accounts and devices as they're moving out of an abusive relationship. As one of our main research goals is to answer questions like, what is the quality of the advice survivors receive, if they receive so on these platforms? As we are directly interacting with survivors, we took certain cautions because we want to minimize the risk of re-traumatizing participants. For this reason, in our interview protocol, we minimize the questions that directly ask survivors about their abuse history. We consolidated a group of support resources to share with survivors in case needed, and the research team is trained so that they can deal with complex situations during the conversation, and also for them to know how to deal with secondary trauma. Based on the conversations we have had with case workers, they have acknowledged that survivors use social media platforms to learn and apply tech advice. However, they face many challenges. And one of them is account impersonation. This means the abuser creates a lot of fake accounts on social media using real photos and information from the survivor to generate a negative reputation for this person. Survivors try to learn how to tackle this and go to social media to apply what they learn, but they struggle for many reasons. For example, this is overwhelming because the accounts that are being generated impersonating them are a lot. And also, if they struggle to identify or locate forms like this one that allow them to report imposters. And if they are able to reach this point, they do not know how to handle it, in particular, if they were locked out of their account. In summary, right now we are interviewing survivors of domestic violence and case workers as we want to better comprehend how social media platforms can improve their support to survivors. I would like to thank my collaborators Sridevi Suresh and advisors Nora McDonald and Michelle Masurek. And if you're interested in learning more or chatting about this, please come talk to me during the poster session. Thank you.